I called the alien woman sweetheart. Her reaction caught me off guard. Mark had always been curious about things most people dismissed as strange or unusual. He liked attending conventions, small exhibitions, and gatherings where people came together to share their interests, whether it was robotics, science fiction, or cutting-edge technology. This weekend, he had convinced himself to go to a science convention in the city. It wasn't huge, just a mid-sized venue with a few hundred attendees, but it promised to be full of discoveries, talks, and exhibits. Mark was especially excited because he had heard whispers about a guest who was unlike anyone else he had ever met. The moment he walked into the convention hall, Mark felt a rush of energy. The room buzzed with voices, laughter, and the occasional beep of a high-tech device. Booths lined the walls, displaying gadgets, models of spaceships, and experimental machines. People were dressed in casual attire, some in cosplay, some in lab coats, and a few with neon hair or odd accessories that made them stand out. It was a lively crowd, but Mark's eyes were searching for something, or someone, different. He noticed her almost immediately. She was standing near a table displaying holographic models of planets and stars. At first glance, she didn't seem out of place. She was tall and slender, with hair that shimmered slightly under the fluorescent lights, giving it an almost unreal glow. Her skin had a smooth, unusual tone, a mix of soft gold and pale cream, something that made her look a little ethereal. But it wasn't just her appearance that caught Mark's attention. It was the way she moved. She didn't hurry like the others, and her gestures were precise, almost measured, as if every movement had a purpose. Mark felt a strange mix of curiosity and apprehension. He couldn't tell if she was part of the convention or someone who had wandered in by chance. But there was something magnetic about her presence. She wasn't trying to stand out, yet everyone around her seemed to notice. People glanced her way, whispered quietly, and then moved on, returning to their own activities.
He debated whether to approach her.
Mark had always been friendly, sometimes even a little impulsive, but he also knew that some people didn't appreciate attention from strangers. Still, something inside him urged him forward. He wanted to talk to her, to find out what made her different. Taking a deep breath, he walked toward her, trying to appear casual. He noticed that she was looking at a display of miniature planets suspended in midair by magnetic fields. Her eyes reflected the tiny lights, making them seem almost otherworldly. Mark realized he was staring longer than necessary, but he couldn't help himself. "Excuse me," he said, keeping his voice light.
"Do you need help finding anything?" She looked at him, and for a moment Mark thought she might ignore him, but then her head tilted slightly and she gave a small nod.
Her voice when she spoke was calm, measured, and smooth, almost musical. "I'm just observing." "Thank you." Mark smiled. He wanted to make the conversation a little less formal, to break the ice. "Well, sweetheart," he said, almost without thinking, "if you want, I can help you find anything you need here. There's a lot to see, and it can get confusing." The moment the words left his mouth, he saw her reaction, and it stopped him cold. Her eyes widened slightly, but it wasn't anger. It was surprise. She straightened up, a small frown appearing on her face, and for a heartbeat, Mark panicked, thinking he had made a huge mistake. "I prefer to be called by my name," she said softly, but firmly. "It is important to me." Mark felt a flush of embarrassment creeping up his neck. He hadn't meant anything disrespectful. He had used the term casually, thinking it was friendly, perhaps even charming, but clearly he had misread her entirely. I'm sorry," he stammered, feeling awkward. "I didn't mean anything by it." "What's your name, then?" She paused for a moment, as if deciding whether he was worth answering, wondering what is.
Finally, she said, "Call me Elara." Mark repeated the name softly in his mind. Elara.
It was elegant, smooth, and unusual. Just like her. There was something in the way she said it, a tone that made him want to remember it perfectly. Elara, he said again, this time with more care. It's nice to meet you. She gave a small nod, and for a moment, the tension eased, but Mark could still feel the subtle distance she kept. She wasn't unkind, but she clearly had boundaries, and he respected that immediately. As they walked slowly through the exhibit hall, Mark tried to focus on the displays, but his mind kept returning to her. She moved with a quiet confidence, stopping occasionally to observe a model or read a description. Always attentive, always precise. He noticed details others might miss. The slight shimmer in her hair, the careful way she handled objects, the gentle tilt of her head when she listened. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, and he felt both fascinated and humbled by her presence. Are you interested in science? He asked, trying to find common ground. I am, she replied. I enjoy learning about systems, about patterns, how things work. Mark nodded, feeling a connection forming despite the awkward start. He realized that she was serious about her interests, not just someone playing a part at a convention. Her attention to detail, her careful observation, and her thoughtful responses made him curious to know more. As they moved from one display to another, Mark noticed other people glancing at her. Some whispered, some stared, a little too long, and a few even took pictures when they thought she wasn't looking. Mark felt a protective instinct rising inside him. He didn't know why, but he wanted to make sure she felt comfortable, safe, and respected. The hall grew more crowded as the morning passed. People rushed from one booth to another, excited by talks and demonstrations. But Mark and Elara seemed to exist in a small bubble of calm. They discussed planets, satellites, and experimental gadgets. Mark noticed that while others were noisy and distracted, she maintained focus, as if observing the world with a clarity he had never seen before. At one point, they reached a corner where a small table displayed intricate models of robotic arms. Mark leaned over to examine them, but he saw her watching him carefully. You have a good eye, she said quietly.
You notice details.
Mark laughed softly, feeling pleased. Thanks, I guess. I just like to see things as they are. Sometimes it's easy to miss the small stuff when everyone is rushing. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. Many people do.
Mark realized that her words were not just about the display. They seemed like a gentle observation about life in general. It made him think.
He'd been so focused on appearances and excitement that he often overlooked subtlety and depth. Elara's presence reminded him to slow down, to notice, and to pay attention. For the rest of the morning, they continued exploring the hall together. Mark felt an unusual mix of emotions, fascination, curiosity, and a touch of nervousness. He wanted to ask more about her, to understand why she seemed so different, but he also didn't want to push. He had learned his first lesson quickly. Respect and patience mattered more than casual familiarity. By the time they reached the central stage for a demonstration of holographic planets, Mark realized he had spent hours talking with her. He didn't feel bored once. Every moment had been full of subtle discoveries, small insights, and quiet intrigue. Even a simple conversation about the displays had become something remarkable. As the demonstration began, Mark watched her closely. She didn't just look at the images. She analyzed them, considered them, and seemed to think about their deeper meaning. It was mesmerizing. He felt that this encounter, brief as it might be, was already leaving a lasting mark on him. Mark also noticed that he had stopped thinking of her as the alien woman, or someone strange. She was Elara, unique, intelligent, and fascinating, but also human, in ways that mattered most. That realization, he knew, would shape how he approached people in the future, with curiosity, respect, and openness. When the demonstration ended, the crowd began to move toward the next attraction, but Mark stayed close. He wanted to continue learning from her, even if only through conversation. Something told him that this was just the beginning of a story he hadn't yet imagined. A story that could change how he saw the world and himself. Mark smiled to himself, thinking about how a simple word, sweetheart, had created an unexpected moment of tension and connection. It had been awkward, yes, but it had also led to the first step in a remarkable encounter. He realized that sometimes mistakes weren't failures. They were openings to something new, something meaningful, something that could teach him more than he had ever expected. And as he walked beside Alara, observing the glowing planets, the moving robots, and the curious faces of the other attendees, Mark felt a spark of anticipation. He didn't know where this meeting would lead, but he knew one thing: it was already unforgettable. Mark couldn't stop thinking about the moment he had called her sweetheart. The word had slipped out casually, almost carelessly, and yet her reaction had frozen him in place. It wasn't anger or offense. It was something else entirely, something he didn't understand at first. There had been a quiet firmness in her voice, a calm yet unmistakable correction that carried weight. Mark realized that, for Alara, being addressed correctly mattered deeply. The rest of the morning had passed in a blur of exhibits and quiet conversations, but that single moment kept returning to him. Every time he saw her look at a display or tilt her head thoughtfully, he remembered how her eyes had widened just slightly when she corrected him. It wasn't a harsh response, but it was clear and deliberate. Mark knew then that first impressions weren't just about appearances. They were about understanding, and he hadn't fully understood her. After the demonstration of holographic planets, the crowd began to disperse toward the next set of exhibits. People moved quickly, chatting, laughing, and jostling each other in their excitement. Mark stayed close to Alara, trying to match her calm pace. Unlike the others, she didn't rush or fumble through the crowd. She moved deliberately, her hands lightly brushing against the edges of tables and displays, observing every detail without haste. Mark felt nervous. He wanted to say something, anything to make the moment lighter, but he also didn't want to repeat his earlier mistake. He opened his mouth a few times and closed it again, trying to find the right words. Finally, he settled on something simple. "I'm glad we met here," he said, his voice low so it wouldn't carry to the surrounding crowd. "It's not often you meet someone who stands out in a good way." Alara glanced at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she nodded slightly. "It is unusual," she replied softly. "Most people are either too distracted or too focused on their own interests to notice differences." Mark nodded, realizing she was right. The convention was full of people who seemed absorbed in their own excitement, oblivious to the subtle details around them. Yet here she was, noticing and analyzing everything, from the small movements of the robotic arms to the faint hum of the holographic projectors.
He wanted to know more about her, but he didn't want to intrude.
He had learned, the hard way, that some questions could come off as too personal or invasive. He decided to observe instead, to let her guide the pace of their interaction. As they moved toward a section displaying miniature satellites, Mark noticed something odd. While the crowd leaned over the models and fidgeted with the interactive controls, Alara stood back slightly, her hands clasped in front of her. She seemed to be studying not the satellites themselves, but the patterns of people around them, the way they interacted with the models, how they reacted to information, and how they moved through the space. Curiosity stirred within Mark. He had always been interested in human behavior, but seeing someone analyze it so carefully, so quietly, was new to him.
"You notice a lot," he said, trying to start a conversation without being intrusive.
She turned her head toward him, her expression calm but focused.
I observe patterns, she said simply.
It helps me understand the environment and the people within it. Without observation, there is no understanding.
Mark smiled, impressed. That makes sense. Most people just rush through things and miss a lot of details.
Elara's eyes met his for a brief moment. Yes, she said. Tension is rare these days. People often choose comfort over awareness. Mark felt a twinge of admiration. She spoke with clarity and thoughtfulness, and even her pauses seemed deliberate, as if every word had been measured for its meaning.
He realized that their interaction was already teaching him something important. Patience, attention, and respect were as valuable as knowledge itself.
They continued walking, passing a table filled with models of Mars rovers. Children crowded around, pressing buttons and making the little machines move, laughing and cheering. Mark watched Elara step aside to avoid the crowd, maintaining her calm demeanor while the chaos swirled around her.
He admired the way she maintained her composure, even when the surrounding energy was loud and chaotic.
Do you come to events like this often? Mark asked, hoping to spark casual conversation. Elara shook her head slightly. Not often, she replied. I choose my experiences carefully. Each place has its value, but most are repetitive. I seek knowledge, not mere entertainment. Mark nodded, understanding more about her mindset. That's actually really interesting. Most people just come to have fun, I guess. I do enjoy it, but I also like learning new things.
Maybe that's why I'm drawn to this kind of event.
She gave a small smile, almost imperceptible, but it felt genuine.
Learning is different from entertainment, she said. One enriches the mind, the other enriches the moment. Mark thought about that for a moment.
It was true. Most of the people at the convention were excited by flashy displays, interactive games, and quick thrills, but Elara's focus was different. She wasn't impressed by spectacle. She was interested in substance, and that, he realized, made her even more fascinating. As they moved to a quieter corner, away from the main exhibits, Mark noticed a small table displaying intricate crystal structures. The pieces reflected light in strange ways, creating patterns that shifted as people moved around them. Elara knelt slightly to examine one, her fingers hovering above the surface without touching it. She tilted her head, studying the patterns carefully. It's beautiful, Mark said quietly. The way the light bends. Ooh, it's almost alive. Elara looked up at him, her eyes calm and observant. Beauty is a form of understanding, she said. It reveals structure, order, and possibility. It teaches without words. Mark nodded, impressed by her insight.
He felt a spark of admiration, not just for the crystal structures, but for the way she saw the world.
Most people took beauty at face value, he realized, but she looked deeper, seeking meaning in every detail.
For a few moments they stood in silence, watching the light play across the crystals.
Mark noticed a few people glancing at them, curious about the unusual pair, but Elara didn't seem to care. Her attention was entirely on the patterns, the reflections, and the subtle shifts in the environment. Mark felt a strange mixture of relief and wonder. Relief because she wasn't offended by his earlier mistake. Wonder because she seemed so different from anyone he had ever met. He realized that meeting her wasn't just an accident. It was a rare opportunity to learn from someone who thought and observed in ways few others did. As they continued through the hall, Mark began to ask gentle questions, careful not to overstep boundaries. He asked about her interests, the reason for her precise observation, and the kinds of knowledge she sought. Each question was met with a calm, thoughtful answer. She didn't offer more than necessary, but she didn't withhold either. It was a careful balance, and Mark found it fascinating. At one point, they reached a display about space exploration technologies. A small crowd had gathered around a presenter who spoke loudly about recent achievements in robotics and artificial intelligence. Mark noticed Alara's subtle expressions, the slight tilt of her head, the narrowing of her eyes, the tiny smile when something intrigued her.
She notices everything, Mark whispered to himself, almost in awe.
Everything that matters. Elara seemed to sense his observation. She glanced at him briefly, and for the first time since they had met, her smile widened slightly.
It was subtle, but it felt like recognition. A quiet acknowledgement that she appreciated his attention and perhaps even his effort to understand her perspective. Mark felt encouraged. He realized that this interaction was not about flashy words or instant friendship. It was about patience, observation, and mutual respect. He had made a mistake earlier, yes, but she had responded in a way that invited learning rather than conflict, and that, he realized, was a rare quality. As the morning wore on, the hall grew noisier. Groups of students, families, and enthusiasts filled the space, all moving with energy and excitement. Yet, Mark and Elara seemed to inhabit a different rhythm, moving deliberately and observing carefully. They discussed topics ranging from the efficiency of satellite designs to the philosophical implications of artificial intelligence. Mark was struck by her depth of knowledge. She didn't just understand facts, she connected them, analyzed them, and considered their broader meaning. For someone who appeared so quiet and reserved, she had a presence that commanded thoughtfulness and attention. By the time they paused near a table of interactive star maps, Mark realized something important. He had not been bored for a single moment. Every observation, every conversation, every glance had been meaningful. He had expected a casual visit to a convention, but instead, he had found a rare encounter that challenged his assumptions, sparked his curiosity, and made him think more deeply than usual. And as he watched Elara point out subtle alignments in the stars, explaining the reasoning behind each one with precision and care, Mark understood that first impressions could be misleading. What had seemed strange or unusual at first was actually a doorway to understanding, and the initial awkwardness of calling her sweetheart was nothing compared to the depth of the connection they were beginning to form.
I get those people.
Mark smiled quietly, thinking about how one brief word, one moment of misunderstanding, had led to an entire morning of discovery, observation, and unexpected learning.
He didn't know what the future held, but he knew this meeting would leave a lasting impression.
For the first time, Mark realized that curiosity wasn't just about learning facts. It was about observing, respecting, and understanding people as much as the world around them. And in Elara, he had found someone who embodied all of those lessons in a single, quiet, and unforgettable presence. After hours of quietly observing and exploring, Mark and Elara finally found a corner of the convention hall that was relatively empty. It was quieter here, away from the loud demonstrations, excited chatter, and moving crowds. For the first time since they had met, Mark felt he could speak freely without the rush of people around them.
Do you come to events like this often?
Mark asked again, this time hoping to learn a little more about her world. Elara shook her head slowly. Not often. Most gatherings are predictable. Choose places where I might learn something meaningful. This convention promised a variety of perspectives, and I wanted to see if that was true.
Mark nodded, fascinated. That's a smart way to approach things.
Most people just go for fun, entertainment. They don't think about what they can truly learn. Elara's lips curved slightly into a small, almost imperceptible smile.
Entertainment is temporary.
Knowledge and understanding last. Mark was struck by her words. They were simple, yet carried a weight that made him pause. He had spent a lot of time chasing excitement, casual fun, and small thrills, But hearing her speak like this reminded him that there was more to life than just passing moments. He looked at her carefully, noticing details he hadn't paid attention to before. The way her hands moved lightly as she spoke, the subtle glow in her eyes when she discussed something meaningful, and the way her presence seemed calm yet focused. Mark realized he had never met anyone like her, someone who could make a quiet conversation feel so profound.
I have to admit, Mark said quietly, I wasn't expecting to meet someone like you today.
I didn't even know what to think when I first saw you. Elara turned her head slightly to study him. Many people make assumptions at first glance, she said. It is natural. It takes time to see clearly. That is why observation is important, Mark smiled. I guess I learned that the hard way, huh? Calling you sweetheart. That didn't go exactly as I imagined.
Elara's expression softened. It was unexpected, yes, but it was not harmful.
Your intent mattered. I simply wanted to be understood, not labeled. That is all. Mark felt relief mixed with curiosity. He had worried that he had offended her, but her words were gentle and instructive. He realized that she didn't react with anger or judgment, only with clarity. That in itself was remarkable. Can I ask you something personal? Mark said, careful to keep his tone respectful. I take you one.
You may if it is relevant, she replied, her voice steady. I've been wondering.
Why do you seem different? I don't mean in a bad way. I just mean, you notice things others miss. You observe carefully and you have this calm way about you.
How did you learn to see the world like that? Elara paused, considering her answer.
Her eyes seemed to focus on something far away, as if she were thinking deeply. I grew up in a place where attention to detail was necessary, not for survival, but for understanding. To see clearly, one must observe without distraction. Most people are distracted by appearances, noise, or expectation. I chose a different path. Mark listened carefully, fascinated by her words. He could tell that her life had been different from his, structured in ways that encouraged thoughtfulness and awareness rather than casual distraction.
So, it's a kind of training then? He asked.
In part, she said.
But it is also a choice. One can train the mind, but one must also choose to see.
Observation without intention is wasted. Observation with intention is learning. Mark nodded slowly, feeling a growing respect for her.
He had spent years learning facts, experimenting and exploring, but he realized that most of his learning had been surface level.
Elara's way of thinking went deeper, connecting observation with understanding in a way he had rarely considered. Do you ever get bored? He asked, curious. Elara's lips curved into a very small smile. Boredom comes when the mind is idle or the purpose is unclear. If one observes, one is never bored. The world always offers patterns, structures, and lessons. Mark laughed softly.
That makes sense.
I guess I get bored when I'm not paying attention. Maybe that's my problem. Perhaps, she said gently, attention changes perception. Perception changes understanding. Understanding changes experience. Mark paused, absorbing her words. Each sentence seemed simple, yet each carried a depth he hadn't anticipated. He realized that this conversation was unlike any other he had had at a convention, or anywhere else. It wasn't casual small talk.
It wasn't superficial. It was
meaningful. Encouraged by the growing connection, Mark decided to take another risk.
Elara, can I ask, are you part of this convention officially? Or are you visiting?
She considered the question carefully. I am not here as a casual visitor. I am here to observe, to learn, and to engage where meaningful knowledge may be found. This is my purpose today. I do not attend every event, only those that may provide insight. Mark's curiosity deepened. Insight into what? He asked gently, careful not to push. Ilara smiled faintly, her eyes thoughtful. Insight into people, systems, and possibilities. To learn from observation is to understand patterns. Patterns can reveal potential and guide action. Mark nodded slowly, feeling both fascinated and slightly overwhelmed. He had expected a normal, casual convention visit, but instead he had found a person whose perspective was entirely different. He felt the conversation, opening doors he hadn't known existed. Doors of thought, observation, and reflection. Wanting to share a little of himself, he said, I guess that's why I enjoy coming to places like this. I like discovering things, learning new ideas, and meeting people who see the world differently. Dao.
Alara's expression softened, and she looked at him more directly for the first time. Then perhaps your path and mine are not entirely different, she said.
We both seek understanding, though we approach it differently. Mark smiled, feeling a rare sense of connection.
Most conversations he had at events like this were fleeting, superficial.
But here, in this quiet corner, he felt that he had found someone who challenged him to think, observe, and reflect in ways he had never done before. For a while, they continued discussing ideas, science, observation, and patterns. But gradually, the conversation became more personal. Mark learned that Alara valued precision, patience, and clarity above all else. She explained how she had cultivated these qualities through years of deliberate practice, choosing to live in a way that encouraged focus and learning. He shared a little about his life, too, his curiosity about science, his love of exploring, and his tendency to rush through experiences without always noticing the details. She listened carefully, occasionally nodding, but never judging. Her attention made him feel understood, even when he stumbled over his words. I never thought a simple conversation could be so enlightening, Mark admitted after a pause. I usually meet people, chat for a few minutes, and move on, but talking to you feels different. I feel like I'm learning something real. Elara regarded him quietly for a moment. Learning is always possible if one is willing, and reflection is a part of learning. Ooh. You are reflecting. Mark felt a warmth spreading in his chest. He had never met someone who could speak so calmly, yet so meaningfully, without making him feel small or judged. The earlier awkwardness, the moment he had called her sweetheart, seemed like a distant memory, replaced now by curiosity, connection, and growing respect. After a long pause, Mark asked another question, careful not to intrude. Elara! Can I ask why you're always so calm? You seem to notice everything, yet you never seem rushed or distracted.
She smiled faintly. Calmness comes from awareness.
Awareness comes from observation. Observation comes from attention. If one follows this path, one can exist in the moment without being overwhelmed. Mark nodded slowly, trying to internalize her words. It wasn't a simple concept, but it made sense. Most people rushed through life reacting to external stimuli without thinking, but Alara had trained herself to observe first, understand second, and act only with purpose.
I want to learn that, Mark said honestly.
I feel like I rush through things too often.
You can, she replied simply. It is a choice.
Awareness is practiced, patience is cultivated. Curiosity is followed. It is not instantaneous, but it is attainable. Mark smiled, inspired by her words. He felt that this brief encounter was more than just a conversation at a convention. It was a lesson in life, observation, and understanding.
In 1992, was the DJ in Comwell live
And for the first time that day, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the hall, Mark and Alara continued their conversation. They moved slowly, discussing ideas, sharing observations, and reflecting on patterns they noticed in both people and technology. Mark felt his mind opening in ways he hadn't expected. For hours they talked, sometimes in silence, sometimes in dialogue, and sometimes sharing small laughter over simple observations. Mark realized that he was experiencing something rare, a connection that was meaningful, respectful, and intellectually stimulating. He had come to the convention expecting curiosity and casual engagement, but he had found a person who could teach him about observation, patience, and understanding in ways far deeper than he had imagined. By the end of the afternoon, Mark felt that the initial awkwardness of their meeting had vanished completely. What had begun with a small, careless word had grown into a conversation full of reflection, insight, and connection. He knew that the experience would stay with him long after the convention ended, and as they finally left their quiet corner and returned to the busier sections of the hall, Mark realized that he had learned an important lesson. True understanding didn't come from rushing, assuming, or labeling. It came from observation, patience, and genuine attention. And in Alara, he had found a guide, a mirror, and a friend in the most unexpected of places. By late afternoon, the convention hall had grown even busier. Families, students, and enthusiasts moved from one display to another, chatting excitedly and examining exhibits. The energy was lively, almost overwhelming, but Mark felt calm. Walking beside Alara, he noticed how her presence seemed to create a small bubble of quiet around them. She moved carefully through the crowd, observing, analyzing, and maintaining her calm focus while the world around them rushed forward. Mark realized he had been changed by the morning's experience. What had started as a casual curiosity, wondering who the alien woman was, had turned into something far deeper. He had learned patience, observation, and the value of genuine connection. And yet, there was more to discover, he felt. He wanted to understand her perspective even further, and perhaps share a little more of his own. "Have you seen all the exhibits today?" Mark asked, keeping his tone light.
Alara shook her head slightly. No.
"Just 2 areas are repetitive, others lack depth. I focus on what holds meaning, where learning can occur."
That is my choice, Mark nodded, understanding her approach better than before.
He had spent most of the day rushing, moving from one display to another, but he had begun to appreciate the difference between observing for fun and observing for understanding.
"I think that's wise," he said. "I tend to rush sometimes. I want to see everything quickly, but I end up missing details."
Alara glanced at him briefly, her expression calm but thoughtful. Rushing leads to distraction. Attention leads to clarity. Clarity allows comprehension. Comprehension allows growth. Mark smiled quietly. Her words were simple but profound. It amazed him how someone could express so much with so little. Most conversations he had were filled with noise, small talk, opinions, or assumptions. But this conversation was different. It was meaningful, deliberate, and engaging in ways he had rarely experienced. They paused near a booth that displayed intricate models of planetary systems. The models spun slowly, reflecting light in delicate patterns. Children and adults alike crowded around, pointing at planets, asking questions, and pressing buttons to activate small demonstrations. Yet even in the middle of the activity, Alara maintained her focus, observing not only the models, but the people interacting with them.
"Do you ever find it hard," Mark asked hesitantly, "to be different? To notice and see things that most people don't?"
Alara considered the question carefully.
"It can be challenging," she admitted.
But being different is not a weakness. It is a strength if understood and embraced. One must accept one's perspective, even if others do not understand it immediately. Mark nodded. He could relate to that in a small way. He had always been curious, always observing, but most people didn't share his interests or notice details the way he did. Meeting someone like Alara made him feel both comforted and inspired. He wasn't alone in valuing attention, observation, and reflection. "You know," he said after a moment, "I never thought a convention could be so life-changing. I mean, I came here expecting some fun and casual exploration, but this has been different. Special, even." Alara looked at him briefly, her expression calm but acknowledging. Special is a matter of perspective. What one considers ordinary, another may consider extraordinary. Perspective changes meaning. Awareness changes experience. Mark smiled, feeling that she had summed up the entire day in one quiet statement. He realized she was right. His experience of the day had been shaped entirely by how he observed, interacted, and reflected. By paying attention, by being open, he had turned an ordinary visit into a meaningful encounter. As the day moved toward evening, the convention began to wind down. Booths were closing, displays were being packed away, and the crowd thinned. Mark and Alara found themselves walking toward the exit together, a sense of calm following them. "Will you be coming to events like this again?" Mark asked. Alara shook her head slightly. "Not often. Only when the potential for meaningful observation exists. Most gatherings are repetitive. Purpose is important. Intent directs attention." Mark nodded. "I understand. But would it be possible to meet again?"
I feel like there's still so much I could learn from you.
Alara regarded him for a moment, her expression calm but not unkind. "Possibly, if the opportunity aligns with purpose and learning." "Intent is necessary." Mark smiled, feeling both encouraged and humbled. He realized that this encounter had been rare, and that even this moment of possibility was a gift. As they stepped outside into the evening air, the city lights glimmered softly. The noise and excitement of the convention faded behind them, replaced by the quiet hum of the streets. Mark took a deep breath, appreciating the calm after a day full of energy and discovery. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Not just for today, but for showing me a different way of seeing things. I feel like I've learned more than I expected." "Bah." Alara's expression softened and she nodded slightly. Learning is possible when one observes, reflects, and listens.
You have done all three. That is commendable.
Mark felt a warmth in his chest. He realized that this wasn't just about knowledge or curiosity. It was about respect, attention, and connection. Alara had shown him that true understanding required patience, deliberate thought, and genuine care for both people and experiences. As they walked toward the streetcar stop, Mark noticed how she moved carefully, yet confidently. Her presence seemed calm, yet full of awareness. It reminded him of how much he had admired her throughout the day, not just for her knowledge, but for the way she carried herself and approached the world. "I feel like I've changed a little today," he admitted. "I've learned patience, observation, and humility, I guess. And I want to keep learning more." Alara looked at him, her eyes reflecting the streetlights. "Change comes from awareness and choice. You have observed, reflected, and expressed intent. Growth is possible. It is up to you to continue." Mark nodded. He felt inspired by her words. They were simple, yet they carried profound meaning. For the first time, he realized that growth wasn't just about knowledge. It was about attitude, awareness, and the choices one made in response to life. At the streetcar stop, the vehicle arrived. its lights glowing softly in the evening. They waited together, standing slightly apart but aware of each other's presence. It was a comfortable silence, one that felt meaningful rather than empty. "You've made this day remarkable," Mark said softly.
"I didn't expect to meet anyone like you, and I'm grateful I did."
Elara regarded him calmly.
"Gratitude is recognition of value."
"You have recognized the potential in observation, reflection, and interaction. That is itself valuable." Mark smiled, feeling both humility and warmth. He realized that he had learned more than just facts or insights about the convention. He had learned something about himself, about curiosity, patience, respect, and the importance of noticing the details others overlook. As the streetcar doors closed and they rode together through the quiet city streets, Mark reflected on the day. He had come expecting casual exploration and curiosity, but he had found something far more meaningful, a person who challenged him to think, observe, and reflect in ways he hadn't imagined. He realized that this encounter would stay with him for a long time, shaping how he approached both people and experiences in the future. Finally, the streetcar reached their stop, and they stepped off into the soft glow of the city evening. They walked a short distance before pausing at the corner.
"I suppose this is where we go our separate ways," Mark said quietly, a hint of reluctance in his voice. Elara nodded. "Or now."
But opportunity and intent may align again. Learning is ongoing. Mark smiled, feeling hopeful.
"I'd like that. And thank you again for today."
"Truly."
"You are welcome," she replied, her tone calm and sincere.
Remember, awareness, observation, and intent guide growth. Carry that with you. Mark watched as she walked away, her figure moving gracefully into the evening, calm and focused, yet leaving a lasting impression.
He felt a sense of gratitude and inspiration he hadn't expected.
What had begun as a casual curiosity, a brief awkward moment of calling her sweetheart, had grown into a day full of reflection, connection, and personal growth. He realized that the encounter had changed him. He had learned the value of patience, careful observation, and genuine respect. He had learned to see beyond appearances and to appreciate depth in both people and experiences. And most importantly, he had learned that true understanding required intention, reflection, and attention. As he walked home through the quiet streets, Mark felt lighter, more aware, and more curious than ever. He knew that he would carry the lessons of this day with him for a long time, and that he would approach future encounters with a new perspective, one shaped by patience, observation, and the quiet wisdom he had seen in Elara.
And though they had parted ways, Mark felt a deep sense of hope.
He understood now that connections were not always about time spent together, but about the quality of attention, care, and understanding shared in those moments. He had found something rare that day, and it had already begun to change the way he viewed the world. The city lights reflected in his eyes as he walked home, a soft smile on his face. He didn't know when or if he would meet Elara again, but he knew one thing. The encounter had left an indelible mark on him, one that would guide him in seeing the world and its people with greater awareness, respect, and curiosity. And for Mark, that was enough.